13th day of June, the Ada County Commission is in session to continue with our budget discussions. All three commissioners are in the room. And so we'll start again today with the clerk's presentation. So, Mr. Clerk, podium's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, this budget cycle is a little bit different this year. As many have already noted in their presentations, I appreciate the board's willingness to entertain this process. We started several months ago identifying that we have a large fund balance. While that is good for capital projects, it is not so helpful to departments for ongoing needs that seem to continue to grow. With higher than normal inflation hitting both taxpayers and employees, we embarked on an audit of every line of the previous 4 years of budget to try to identify areas that we could find some ongoing savings in to keep taxes low, to properly compensate employees, and still provide outstanding service for the county. What I'd like to show you is each budget presentation, each budget submitted in detail to be able to satisfy those things. As you can see here, starting out with the assumptions that the board had previously talked about. Again, these are not decisions. Currently, they're just plugged in with a 0% increase in property tax, taking the new construction roll, and a 3% merit that comes along with a $2.5 million PERSI increase. We are still $1.7 million short in revenues to cover all of the supplementals that have been asked. Now, I'm sure there'll be lots more machinations that we go through with this when we get into deliberations, but I just wanted to set the stage for that. When we look at the historical trends for the county's personnel budget, we can see here that in 2021, we were 3% unspent at $5 million. In 22, we were 6% unspent to the tune of roughly $9.5 million. And in 2023, we were 5% unspent to the tune of almost $10 million. Right now, our projections show that we are going to be closer to 2.2% unspent, which is our target, which is what we would like to be at roughly around $5 million of unspent personnel funds. Now, there's a number of reasons that go into these unspent funds, many of which are not in the departments and elected officials are in control of. Mainly vacancies, turnover rates, insurance costs associated with those vacancies. So that's where a lot of those personnel savings or unspent funds come from. And so it's hard to really drill down and show that. The one thing the board did do this year, and they agreed to this, was to eliminate funding for positions that were budgeted that had not been filled for a year and were not posted. That was a significant savings on the personnel side this year. If we look at the capital operating, it has been growing from year to year in unspent funds. We have gone from 10% in 21 at $6.3 million to $7.7 million in 22 for 12% unspent. This last year, $9.1 million at 12%. And right now we're on track to have 18% unspent in our capital operating budget lines for a total of $13 million unspent. Every department is different. That's why I'm briefing these exact numbers for you today. You'll see the different efforts that departments and elected offices went into trying to adjust their budgets. One of the reasons I'm doing that is that it covers my statutory obligation to brief to you historic spend and actuals and then current expense. But I will also be presenting the numbers unbiased and unfiltered for you to take a look at. There are some good reasons for unspent money. Needs change over 18 months after budgets are adopted. I'm not encouraging people to spend money they don't need to. This audit identified areas of interest. As you have seen in presentations, most found savings. Some shifted those savings to other areas of need. Some came in under allocation, freeing up money to go towards employee compensation. The goal was to relieve pressure on raising taxes unnecessarily, address COLA merit needs, and provide great service to our citizens. As I already explained, currently without taking any of the 3% and granting the 3% COLA merit, we are still short on the revenue that we need. I'd like to show you quickly some of the revenue projections that we have for this upcoming year based off trends that we have seen. You can see here, these are the sources of revenue outside of property tax that we can tap into, in addition to fees that we charge for service, so departmental revenues. For liquor, we are seeing a trend that we can, it looks like people are in good moods, increase our liquor revenue by $400,000 in the coming year to $7.5 million. For sales tax, we've heard from the state as well as the IEC and many other economists that have looked at this, that sales tax will probably remain flat for this coming year, so we did not increase revenues in that area. For revenue sharing, same. The trends are that that is not going to increase for us, so we're keeping that at $27 million. For interest, the board is intimately aware with our LGIP interest that we bring in. It has spiked in the last year because of the yields that we are getting on some of our short-term investments. After talking with the Treasurer's Office extensively and looking at a long-term forecast, we feel comfortable raising that ongoing revenue to $5.5 million, which is an increase of $2.75 million over the previous year. We don't feel comfortable doing higher than that because in the out years, that may not be realized, and then that would stick the county in a position where we would have to replace that ongoing revenue with taxes or some other form of revenue. That is an update on the revenue. I encourage, as I go through this process, the board to ask questions. If it is a why question, I will most likely turn around and look for a department head or an elected official to give you more information as to why those numbers are the way they are, but I can brief the numbers. For reference, current expense should be at 69%. So as you hear me rattle off percentages of spent budgets to date, that is your gauge of a 69%. If they're below that, they're underspending. If they're above that, they're overspending. Now, there is some margin of errors within those things. For instance, some departments have higher spend rates towards the end of the year, as you're familiar with fairs and parks and all those other things. So if you see very, very low numbers, that should not be an automatic alarm. On the personnel side, however, if you're seeing something drastically different than 69, we have either misbudgeted because of some reason, or there's high vacancies, or something else is going on, an unfilled position that's been out there for a while. So those are some references for you. Targets generally that we want for personnel budgets at the end of the year for best business practices and GFOA recommended budgeting practices are 98% spent for our personnel budget. Now remember, that's 98% of 98% because we only budget at 98% for our personnel. For capital operating, we're targeting 95%. So if the numbers are off of those, then there's possibly room for improvement in those areas. I don't claim that this process is perfect. But I do believe that it has helped us getting closer to managing some of these funds a little bit more wisely. So with that, I will jump into the treasurer first. Beth gets to be the guinea pig. I'm sure she loves that. And as I go through this, this will be, you have access to this tool. You have a version of it that you can manipulate on your own as well. On the personnel or on the summary page, you can see all of the budgets for all the folks. On these links on the left-hand side, it will take you to what I'm going to be briefing off of. So first up, the treasurer. As you can see on the left-hand side, this is budget as submitted with one caveat, and this will be for all of them. The number for personnel is 98%. So while we allocated 100%, we only budget at 98%. So these numbers may differ slightly from what people think was in their personnel budget that was sent out on their allocation. This has already been adjusted for budgeting purposes to 98%. On the operating side, she is up 9.8%, and we'll show you some of those details in here. The personnel side up 6%, only because she's asking for an additional body as a supplemental. For history, you can see here on the right-hand side, for personnel and capital operating altogether over the last year, she has improved from 89% up to 93% this last year for budget to expense. If we drill into personnel, she has gone from 92 to 91. She's hovering around 92, 93% on average. Currently, she's at 63.8%. Again, the actual expense to date should be closer to 69, so she may have some vacancies. If you have questions on that, you can ask for specific details. And then on the capital operating side, she has hovered around 90% for the last several years, which is very good, only about $41,000 in 23 unspent. And she's currently at 71.8%, so she is right in the ballpark of spending her capital operating budget for this year. For areas of interest, the areas that the audit identified as possible areas to look further into. Again, we weren't mandating or directing cuts in these. These were just areas that showed up on our audit as having some sort of abnormality, either a historic unspend rate that was over several years or a dramatic change from one year to the next that we couldn't explain. One of the reasons we added those lines of interest into our audit is because the board 2 years ago approved a 3% increase to capital operating. 2 years ago was a 2.5% increase to capital operating. What we found is some departments may not have needed that as much as others, and they may have just put that extra money into certain line items without necessarily having a strong rationale for it at the time, expecting that they may have increased cost in that year, and they may not have realized them. If you look at her lines of interest, she had 9 that were identified, and of those 9 line items, she reduced her budget in those 9 line items by 34%. In her other line items, the 60 remaining, her budget went up 5.4%. That is primarily due, again, to the one supplemental request that she asked for additional position. As we dive deeper, that's a diaper word, huh? Dive deeper into this, we can show you these specific lines that were identified as highlighted, and in the right-hand column for reference, if there's a blue column here, that means there was a reduction in that line item. So of all line items, she either stayed the same or reduced it some level, again, to show those savings here. If the board or an elected official department wants to dive into the other line items, we can do that, but I'm not intending that unless there's a specific question that the board may have. Are there any questions on the detailed line items in here that we asked the departments to look at?
Any questions? I don't have any questions.
Okay. As we continue on down on her personnel side, she has one request for a supplemental for a new position. Here is her budgeted positions over the last several years, going from 15 and 21. I think previous to 21, she was actually at 16. And so she is currently asking for one more position this year. That position is for financial analyst, sorry. in here. At this cost, total cost for the county salary as marked on here, and then here is the explanation. As I go through these, I will bring all of these up for each department. If the board has any questions, please feel free to ask on any of these, or if you want additional information on these supplemental requests. As you can see here, historical supplemental requests from the treasurer's office back in '23. There was a supplemental request. It was granted. The coding on here is if it's solid, it was granted by the commission. If it's striped or red striped in previous years, it was not granted. In this 25 column, this is pending, and it will not go solid until the board agrees to this supplemental. So in this year, again, this one supplemental is primarily tied to her new position. She has no supplemental requests for capital operating, nor any EOE or CIP requests. As of right now, with the revenues that are coming in for her department, which we agree that her projected revenue for this next year is in line with what she has been doing so far. She has collected 101% of her revenue this year so far, but we don't anticipate much more of that coming in. She would be in need of some additional funding, obviously, to come up with funding for the supplemental that she has asked for. And that is the treasurer's budget as submitted in detail, including the line items of interest. Are there any questions from the board?
Any questions? Nope.
Okay. We will then move on to the coroner's office.
Before we get to that,
Yeah.
what does that 69% represent? At what point in time is that percentage?
I believe it's the last pay period that we have recorded. Is that correct? It's through May. So it
through
doesn't
May.
include the first part of June.
Okay.
Would this be the time to ask about the new position?
Yeah, for sure. This is the perfect time.
Is there somebody from the treasurer's office who could speak to it?
Sure, there is. Beth?
Are you able to bring up the job description, Trent, again?
Yes, I can bring that up. These will not be job descriptions necessarily. They will be justifications for the position, I think.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to answer a couple questions about this. So is this just the basic job description that you've come up with that's on the screen here?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, so this is just the justification, not the full job description. We have had an analyst in the past, so we do have a draft of a job description that we would use for this new position. But this does highlight some of the duties of that new position. You've heard a lot about the population growth, so I won't get into that, but I would also add just the growing complexity in administering property taxes. This past year, there were 3 new forms of tax relief in forms of levy reductions, credit, so it's really helping analyze and understand the complexity of property tax administration. As you're aware, there's so many tax cancellations or adjustments that come through. And this person would really help processing those adjustments so that the taxpayer's account is correct as soon as possible in the county records, and any refunds owed to those taxpayers are processed quickly. So this person would help with that too.
One of the things you list in there is interpret and implement new legislation. So my concern is just with different departments going to the legislature on their own without, talking to the board or working through the Idaho Association of Counties. So how much do you feel that is a part of that position, and why does that need to come from your office instead of working with, Idaho Association of Counties and using their legislative advisor?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, or Commissioner Davidson, we work extensively with IEC on this and through the Treasurer's Legislative Committee. So this position is not an advocate for the Ada County Treasurer as a standalone entity. What was intended there was more interpreting, for example, House Bill 521, that was passed this session. So this person would help us analyze the new funding formula and then also writing specifications for our IT programming department to help program that and then test it before it goes onto the bill. So it's not in a advocacy type of position. It's more just analyzing and make sure that, educating legislators should they come to us in the spring, but it's really also implementing and testing legislation that is passed.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Any other questions on treasurer before we move on?
Are there any questions? Nope. Thank you. We'll move on to the coroner's office now.
I take that back, Anthony. It might have been good to have these in order of briefing. Here it is.
Well, while you're looking that up, I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
How did we get to the, historically, in terms of the revenue side, for the investment revenue side, the 5.52 that you mentioned, in terms of what's going on, Federal Reserve, all of that? How did we calculate that?
I'd have to have Beth come up, or maybe one of Beth's folks come up to explain the details of it. I know there are very complicated spot charts that go out and show, based off the type of investment that we put the money into, what the projected yield would be on that. And it shows a tapering at about 2 or 3 years out. Right now, it's remaining high, obviously, as interest rates remain high and the yield curve is inverted. But that plot chart that they use to go, in 2 or 3 years at this rate, based off the yields that we see and what other people are buying into investments, we expect that it to be at this dollar figure. And so that's what we discussed as a group. But if Beth or someone else wants to come up, or Tim, whoever has the best explanation.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I can kick it off, and then Tim can get into more details. So currently, we are returning closer to $1 million each month in our investments. But if we look at on a longer term, just the uncertainty of what the feds are going to do. For example, going into this calendar year, we thought that there could be 5 or 6 cuts in rates, and so far there have been none. Even yesterday, the feds had held steady. So it's that uncertainty. So we take a very conservative approach. Certainly, if something were to change, we wouldn't want to have to sell investments early. And so with this conservative approach, looking out years ahead, we felt that 5.5 was more predictable in terms of ongoing revenue, not one time, but for the ongoing floor. And for that, do you have anything you wanted to add to that, Tim?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. What Treasurer Mon and the clerk said is exactly correct. We look out long-term, several years. Of course, we know how the market is behaving now, and we watch very closely what the Fed does. But one of the other things we do, especially when we're forecasting out into 2, 3, 4, and 5 years out, and the best thing we can do really is look at the Fed, what they call the Fed dot plot. And what that is it surveys the Fed participants, and you might have, for example, 20 of them, economists that will give their prediction on where they think interest rates will be, 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years, 3 years. And the reason they call it a dot plot is because each participant of that, has a little dot, and it'll show in what year and then what they think the interest rates will be set at. And what we do, and when you look at those, you'll see dots kind of in several different places, but you tend to see kind of a clumping of, so it's looking at the majority of what these economists think and where that'll be at. And so if you were to graph it and draw a line through where most of them, you come to kind of a median range. And what we do is we take our existing investments, the ones that we know have solid returns. So these are bonds that we own. We know what the coupon payment's going to be. We know how long we'll get that yield to maturity rate until it matures. And then we look at the more liquid money market type investments and the LGIP, which is highly affected by the short-term interest rates. And we can do calculations on that and kind of estimate where we'll be. And although we've talked recently how we're looking at a projection of about 14 million, maybe slightly more than that for this fiscal year, the reason we came up with the 5.5 million is because we look at the Fed dot plots. We know the Fed's target rate is 2%. We're well above, probably 60, 70% above that target rate. So what that means is they're going to continue to put pressure to get that down to that 2%. And so what we've done is, as Treasurer Mon said, is take a kind of a conservative approach, and 5.5 million is the figure we came up with that we feel comfortable that we can meet that in terms of our minimum. We don't want to, we may get higher, but we don't want to over project and then be disappointed. So we do a pretty thorough analysis. We look at government charts, what the government expects, what the Fed is doing, and what they expect to do in the future to come up with those.
Thank you. I guess the reason for the question is fine-tuning that, just like we're trying to fine-tune the operational costs in terms of the fund balance. That's why I asked the question, so that we would make sure we were fine-tuning that, the revenue side as well as the expense side. So thank you for that explanation.
Yep, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, for the coroner's budget, overall up. You can see the personnel up 3.3% due to some supplemental requests, as well as operating up 4.7% as well. You can see the historical trends here. Last year, the coroner came in at 97.1%, which was really good for the overall budget. If we dive deep into the personnel side, and last year, 97% was expended for him, which is great. 97.6 actually. Currently 67.6, so just slightly under the 69 that we were expecting. And then for the operating and capital side as well, the last 2 years have been really good. And right now, though, he's trending at 48.8%. I'm sure there's lots of reasons for that with the move to the new facility and other things, but that's his current expend rate. Areas of interest, these identified line items, 5 of those, there was a overall $1,000 increase in those line items. In the other line items, there was a $160,000 increase at 3.5%. If we dive deep into those line items, you can see one of them was reduced and 2 of them were increased. Sorry, I don't have that frame frozen, but cell phone expense, conference training, and I believe he addressed those in his budget brief. Are there any other line items that you would want addressed or have questions on in his?
What was the total amount that was over last year?
For last year, the unspent, or?
No, the total amount that's in the over on the line items.
He wasn't over in any one. The total amount here, you can see that based off the different line items, that he reduced this line item by 900 in the upcoming budget, and these 2 other line items he increased in those, and that was photo supplies and that decreased, in educational supplies and uniforms increased. The others remain the same. And those were just areas of interest that we said, based off the historical spend rates of these, you might have some savings in here. All right. In his personnel line items, he is up 2. He is requesting 2 new positions. He has, in his brief, said he would pull back on one of those positions, so we've already eliminated that from this chart. One of those positions he was able to fund with an increase in revenue that we'll show you here in a second. The other one, he is still asking for a supplemental in. He is also asking for supplementals for some promotions. For the new positions, this is the receptionist that he, I believe, is this the one that's being funded?
Yes.
Yeah, so this one is being funded with increased revenue that he was able to realize in his own budget. This position has been pulled. This is the examiner that he has pulled. And then this one is the position, he still has a supplemental in there for the shared admin position. Any questions on any of those that he has in there?
Any questions?
Okay. For the promotions, these are for an admin specialist. It looks like admin specialist 2, admin specialist 3, forensic tech. You can see the dollar figures associated with those, $3,900, $3,900. All these have been through HR, I believe. And these are the supplemental changes in promotion for these positions. Forensic tech, medical legal, is that right? Did I get that right? Medical legal. I don't even know what that means. Death investigator, there you go. Another one. And those are the requests for promotions within his office that he is asking for supplemental in. And he's not actually asking for supplement in those. Those were covered with his increased revenue that he had. You can see the positions here over the last several years budgeted, and then he's requesting again 34 positions for FY25. Of the personnel supplementals that have been asked for in the past, you can see ranging from $750,000 up to over $1.5 million. This year, his supplemental ask is small compared, only for the additional position that he is requesting for. For other supplemental requests, in the past, he's had some asks up to $200,000. This year, he has none. And EOEs and CIPs, he has none. This is where this last couple of days we worked with him in his office to look at his revenue based off the board's request to increase those fees for out-of-county autopsies. And we bumped his revenue up to $435,600 from previously $323,000. And we believe that's a good mark to hit, which again allows him to cover some of the costs that he had previously asked for in his supplementals. As you remember, he did ask for some they weren't CIPs, they were supplemental operating costs that he needed additional funds for. He has now been able to cover that with his increased revenue due to the out-of-county autopsies. So those have been removed from the supplemental request. And that's where the coroner's budget stands. Are there any questions for the budget numbers or for Coroner Riffle? Is he here? There he is. It's a good-looking man in the back.
Yeah, remind me again what the out-of-county autopsies, what the actual expense is, and what the actual cost we're charging for it.
Okay. I'd probably have him come up and talk to that. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, and I did not hear the question, I'm sorry.
The question is, how much are we charging for out-of-county autopsies, and how does that relate to the actual expenses?
We're charging $2,300 per case, a full autopsy, And I believe that's about, I want to say about 15% over cost as, when I had the audit done, they gave me the number and we talked about where to put the fee.
Right.
So it's about 15% above.
Above your actual cost, but it didn't take into consideration any of the overhead expense.
Whatever the auditor used, that's where the number came from.
Right, all right.
I'm assuming that the overhead and personnel costs and all that were associated, broken down by, I would imagine, by the, how much time, average time it takes to do an autopsy.
Mr. Chair, sorry, I just double checked with Ryan. It does include your overhead cost, so.
So we have, I'd like to see that, because we have a huge overhead. And what's the percentage of out-of-county autopsies compared to our total autopsies?
I would have to look that up to get an accurate number for you. We currently do about 162, well, about 175 out-of-county autopsies. Again, I'd have to look it up, but I think our total number, our cases plus theirs, is about 600, maybe 700 total.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'd like to see that audit report if we could. Yeah, if you give it to us, I'd like to see it, because it doesn't seem to me with the total budget of your budget and the percentage of the work that's done, it seems like we're still, and that's fine, we're still subsidizing all the other counties to do these autopsies, I believe, but.
Yeah, like I said, I got the number from
Yep.
the auditor, so.
We'll have to look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions while I'm standing?
I don't
here?
have any other.
You want to just quickly address your supplemental position again?
The supplemental position is the shared admin position, so it'll cover entry-level duties covering 3 different divisions. It is a unique position to the county, is my understanding, because it's shared as opposed to, full-time here and or shared, if you will. So if allowed, it hasn't been fully developed yet, but the need is there. Should you gentlemen decide to approve that, then we'll build it and implement it. If it helps, I'm okay if you don't approve that. Like if we want to withdraw it, that's fine, because that allows me more time to really dive deep and present a better case next year for that position. So that just saved you another 73. So there you go. I've done my part.
Okay, any more questions?
No, I'll just say I do appreciate, your work to find the savings there. And I guess it did work out good that we didn't approve the receptionist last year because we didn't really have a building to put her in.
Yeah.
No fault of yours, but obviously the need is going to be there now that the
Oh, yeah.
the building is open.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that position will help greatly, and with the help of the clerk here, figuring out the revenues to cover that, oh my God, that was huge for us. So we're very, very happy about that.
Is that person going to be the main public face, of your office, greeting the public as they come?
It is my understanding that yes, that person will, we have, our current receptionist will actually move one desk over, and then this person will be the new first person seen.
Great.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to the next?
Any questions? No? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Next, we will look at juvenile. For juvenile, her personnel is up slightly, just 1.1%. Her operating is down 9.4%, and her capital is down 100%. She came in well under her allocation. If we look at the historical trend, what's not included in these dollar figures here, which is difficult for juvenile and us to track, are grants. They're pass-through grants. And so some of these figures are hard to follow, but currently in her current year overall, she is at 57.6%. trending slightly below the 69% that we talked about. If we dig into personnel, much higher in those percentages. Again, some of those are grant funded. And so tracking those grant funding is difficult, but she's at 57% in her current year for her personnel. And then operating capital, again, these are up, you can see the adjustments made here. Those grant portions of her budget are, again, difficult to track, but she is at 65.2% this year. When we bring some additional grants on, that number will obviously jump up, and she's been very good about expensing those grants and managing them as pass-throughs. For the areas of interest, 34 areas of interest that we identified in her budget, she was down 18.1% in those line items for a savings of $48,297. In her other line items, there were some additional needs, an increase of 0.6%. These yellow line items you can see on the right-hand side. I know these numbers are very small, but it's easier to show here. Vast majority of these positions were reduced. There was one line item that was increased, a professional mental health services had an increase there in those line items, as she explained in her budget brief, the reason for that, and then the vast majority of these are reductions. Any questions on any of these line items in particular?
Go ahead.
This is just a general question, and you might not be able to answer it, but in a budget sense, as you're looking at all the divisions and the whole grants question, how do you estimate that in terms of the variability or the availability of grants, especially when it becomes a huge part of any division's budget?
Grants range in their complexity and size, obviously, across the whole county. Some departments and elected offices will manage their own grants, and they will go out and seek additional grants. Some grants are pretty routine, and I think juvenile has a mix of a lot of them. I'd be happy to have Allison come up and talk through that. She's probably better equipped to talk about the complexity of her specific grants, if you'd like.
Well, it was a general question in terms of how you view, when you're looking at the overall budgets and we're working with the divisions, how do you accommodate the variability? In other words, if there's an expectation for a grant, a major grant, especially if it's a major part of the division's budget, and then it doesn't materialize for, like if it's a federal grant or wherever they get the grant from.
Well, I don't think we budget grants unless they're approved.
Trent? Yeah. And the only grants, Commissioner, that we do budget or we allow to be budgeted during the budget process is for juvenile for their SIG and block. Because like Trent said, they are very predictable, even their pass-through grants. So juvenile will get a list of their anticipated revenue receipts that they're going to receive from the state, and they've been pretty much spot on for a number of years. All other grants are brought on during the resolution process. You guys are very well of the fact of in open business meetings quite often having those resolutions for those grants and bringing that grant funding on. So it's our county's policy that we never bring on the revenue for our grant until the award is signed, sealed, delivered, gone through legal and everything else, and we know we're going to get the funding. This is just a one-off exception because of the nature of juvenile and the predictability of that grant funding.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay. For the positions needed, she is holding steady at 130. She does have some promotions and job reclasses in here. The job reclass is no cost. The promotions are for some positions within her office. Detention officer promotion, I believe, for most of these. Administrative specialist, probation officers, And again, these have been through HR for approval. If you have any questions on specific ones, we can obviously dive deeper into any one of them, but those are the promotions that she has submitted within her budget this year. For positions budget, obviously you can see she's over historically down from what she was in FY21 at 155 down to 130. Her personnel supplemental requests from the last several years. She didn't ask for any additional ones last year or for this year. Other operating supplemental requests, none for this year or last year. She has had some previously. And then EOEs and CIPs, she has none. For her revenue, it is slightly up year over year. And again, she is under her allocation. She is pitching into the 3% merit pool. So appreciate her efforts in her budget this year. Any questions on juvenile's budget or for Allison?
Any questions? No? Thank you.
Great. What's that? Did we skip over IT?
Yeah, you did.
My fault. Steve? Forgive me.
It's a public meeting, you can't go back.
Okay. I'm so excited about juvenile.
Thank you, Trent.
You're welcome. All right, getting into IT here. As you can see, budget up 0.5% in personnel. Operating is up 6.8%. Their capital is flat at, I believe, 565 year over year. And again, they're over allocation by 551 due to their supplemental requests. You can see in here, last FY23 at 93.8%. That's fairly good for their expense rate. They, in current year, are at 69.2%. So he is right on overall with his budget for this year. If we dive into personnel, he is slightly lower than the 69% currently, but historically has come fairly close to expending most of his personnel budget. Over the last couple of years, it's been slightly lower. That's really a trend over most departments because of COVID and the high vacancy rates that we've had. But he is just slightly below on track for this year. For operating and capital, last FY23 at 94%. Currently, he's at 74%. Again, that's above the 69% where we expect. But again, some of those are cyclical. They'll hit us earlier in the year than others. For areas of interest, he had 24 areas of interest. For his FY25 submitted budget, those are up $51,000 for an increase of 7.4%. On his others, he had an increase of $505,000 or an increase of 2.9%. If we dive deep into these, to the yellow line items, you can see some of these line items were significantly reduced. Others had some increases to them. Telephone and data, internet had a significant increase in this line item, as well as computer software and temp payroll services had increases within these line items. Others had reductions. Here, computer software within the project management team was down $50,000, and then some other decreases in equipment repair and conference and training and education within the enterprise systems. Any questions on any of those line items?
Any questions?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I had a question about the temporary payroll services and what exactly that is.
Sure, I'll have Steve come up and explain that.
Excuse me. Morning, gentlemen. Thought I got off scot-free there.
No such luck.
Chairman Beck and Commissioner Davidson, we do keep a bit of temp services around in general in case we need some sort of backup. But in this particular case, we're using one of the positions that we're funding next year, I have 2 new headcount coming that we've funded within budget, I believe. And one of them is this, we have a temp in that spot right now, basically. So we increased it for that. And then also, something I didn't mention, there is a department at Boise State University. It's called the Center for Pervasive Cybersecurity. And we are going to be adding bringing cyber interns in that will be assisting with us. Right now, it's a pretty substantial program that's starting up, that they're assisting all of education in the state, looking at, because education, the schools, the school districts don't have a lot of money for cyber, so they're effectively using this center and their interns as a force multiplier. The benefit to BSU is these students get to see what live, real-time cyber incident data looks like, because we're always getting something going on. They reached out, and they can't necessarily handle our data because we're too big and too wide. Despite school being all over the state, of course, our data is just too vast. We are going to bring some of their folks in. We're thinking possibly 2 interns to come in and look at some of our low-level stuff. The point of that institute, led by a gentleman named Ed Vasco, is to give their students real-world experience and also introduce them to new lanes of business, in the hopes that BSU will get some of their graduates to stay in the area. So it's a long explanation to say we want to bring in some interns, further interns.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thanks.
Sorry, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. As you can see, in the personnel side, there are 2 additional positions from last year. Currently, they are in budget under his allocation. Those 2 new positions are in software development for growth and project management. Content engineer. Is the first one? Sorry. Content engineer, and the second one is project management, right?
The first one is a software developer, and the second one's a content engineer.
Okay, so this one's a content engineer, sorry. And the first one is a software developer. For special salaries, there's $29,977, again, within the allocation. These are for administrative assistant, field support tech, another field support tech, software development lead, a software developer, and a web content specialist, a network specialist, and a enterprise systems position. Those are the requests for promotion within this Department of IT. And then there was one, those are special salaries, and then there are 5 promotions. Within promotions, a web developer 2, another web developer, business analyst 3, network specialist, and a systems engineer for all promotions. Totaling $289,440, all falling within his allocation. Positions budgeted, you can see the historical from FY21 from 69 to currently requesting 77. Personal supplemental requests for these. The last 2 years, he have had no supplemental requests. For operating and supplemental requests, several of these, you've been briefed on these in his brief. I will not jump into those unless there's a specific one that you would like to look at, and we can pull it up and ask questions on. Are there any of those that you would like to see?
All right.
Okay. And then EOEs and CIPs, obviously in '23, there was a large one. The last 2 years, he has not asked for any CIPs or EOEs. In need of funding through at least some of these sources. He is not a revenue generator, but he is keeping that flat from last year, $130,000. So he does have some revenue. I shouldn't say that. Sorry, Steve.
I'm a revenue spender, Trent.
Yeah, he's a revenue spender. So any questions overall for IT?
Any questions? No? Okay.
All right, we've been going for an hour. Would it be okay to take a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break to get some water and we'll come back?
Sure. We'll take a break. 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
So that means we can wrap it up here pretty quick. We've got several left. Go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, Commissioner Davidson, I hope to get you out on time for your trip this afternoon. We will do that. Up next, emergency management. As you can see in their budget submission, again, they have a unique funding source. They're a unique group of individuals. They're awesome. They're up 2.8% on their personnel, and I'll show you why that is. And then their operating is down 12.6%. For their budget history. Again, noting that the solid blue, again, this is sometimes a confusing point with some of the departments and elected officials, making sure the board understands this as well. The solid blue line is what their budget was submitted as. And then if there's anything that is grant-related, rollover, anything that's unanticipated or even anticipated that's not in the original budget as submitted, that's what shows up as adjustments from year to year. They have been historically under. Again, this is one of those departments that I think everyone generally agrees is good to have money there when you need it, because we hope to not be responding to emergencies all the time. Currently, he's at 51.7% of his budget for the year. If we delve into personnel, he's at 47%. Historically, been higher in the low 90s and 70s for his personnel budget. For capital operating, you can see a significant decrease, but again, as that funding comes in for adjustments, that number will pop back up. Areas of interest, we identified two. He was able to find a 34.5% reduction in that with some additions to the other line items. As we dive deeper, you can see on here the two line items for equipment, fuel, and conference training and education were reduced in his budget for a reduction of $3,394. So he was able to find some savings in those two line items. Any questions on the details here?
Any questions?
And if at any time the board or anybody else wants to go into more detail of the other line items, we can absolutely do that as well.
Okay.
For the personnel, he has a market rate adjustment in here that is covered under his current budget, and that is for his position. I know that there was a concerted effort for department heads to make some compensation adjustments for them this last year. So that is the market adjustment in his budget. For personnel, long over history, 5555, pretty steady. And for supplemental requests and EOE and CIPs, he has none historically. Here is his revenue. Again, you heard about the reduction, I believe it was the 9% reduction.
Sir.
Is that right? In the federal grant, which accounting for the revenue source here. He needs no other money to make his operation run this next year. Any questions for his budget or for Joe himself? I know he's dying to get up here and tell you something.
Well, I don't have a question, just a comment. Joe needs to be congratulated because the members of the ACCM have asked for a reevaluation of how the various participants contribute to it, and that's what we did, and it's more reflective of the budget. See, prior, it wasn't a reflection of the budget, it was just a calculation. And so they asked him to make it more reflective of the budget, and I think that's worked good. And it's a demonstration of the strong partnerships that we have in Ada County.
Absolutely. All right, moving on then to TCA. With the budget submitted from TCA, they are up 2.3% for personnel. That is, again, due to the additional positions they are asking for. And their operating is up 10.8%. We will look at the supplementals in there that are a part of that. Budget year over year is slightly up, as you can see. Sandra does a really good job of expending her budget that she has requested. If we delve into personnel, slightly lower trend, but she is currently at 63% today. Again, with that hallmark of, or the benchmark of 69% currently. Capital operating, last year, 98.2%. Very good job of budgeting and expending those. This year, currently tracking at 72.3%, slightly higher than the rate. For areas of interest, she had 7 line items that were identified for possible savings. She cut those 50% for a savings of $146,677. In other areas, there were increases of $765, due mainly to the 4 positions, 2 of which she is covering within her allocation and 2 of which she is asking for supplementals for. Dive deep into these. I know Ryan and these guys have eagle eyes. I can't see that close. Every single one of the line items that were identified, she was able to find some savings in, again, to the tune of $146,677. And you can see the line items that were identified. Any questions on any of those or any other line items?
Any questions? Nope.
I guess, how come the vehicle repair and maintenance doesn't fall under the fleet manager?
I do not know the answer to that question. Anybody else?
Is that maybe vehicles allocated to state employees, not county employees?
Yeah, several departments will have this within their office still, but I guess that's a point of discussion going forward with the fleet management.
Morning, Commissioners. Thanks, Trent. So we are in the process, actually, we moved a couple of our vehicles to the fleet, the carpool program, and we're in the process of moving some things. We noticed through it that we had some gas that we were covering that potentially should have been under the different budget. So we're working on all those. So I don't have a specific answer as to why we kept them. We do have 2 cars that our process servers use, and that's their job, to drive and serve documents. So we kept money for that, but we're talking with our fleet manager to see if there's a better way to do that.
All right, thank you.
All right, looking at personnel supplementals, 4 new positions, 2 of which are under a supplemental. Sandra briefed those in her brief. They are 4 bailiff positions. Those are here, all same justification and reviewed by HR. For positions budgeted, as you can see in FY21, she was at 83 positions. They are now at 81 with the 4 additional requests that they have. For personal supplementals, again, those are the 2 positions that they cannot currently fund with the money they have within their allocation. No other supplemental requests. EOE hardware replacement project, that is again in conjunction with my office as well, as we are replacing some state computers with county computers to hopefully have a more reliable maintenance and equipment area for the computers and our personnel. CIP program, you had heard the 2 briefings on those, the camera installation for the stairwells and outside areas, as well as the lobby information desk remodel on the first floor. Anything you would like to ask more about that, or questions you may have on any of these? Okay. As you see, departmental revenue historical, she has bumped up to $2.73 million here for her budget. And she has been bringing in generally what she has budgeted for revenue, and she's currently at 68.5% for revenue, so she's on track to hit her revenue projections. So we're pretty happy about those revenues. Any questions for Sandra or for the budget here as you see presented?
Okay. I don't have any questions. Nope.
Okay. Moving on to human resources. Personnel budget up 0.5%, operating up down 0.3%. Allocation just slightly over. You can see the budget history here. Historically, the last 2 years, around 80%. Prior to that, 94% overall. Currently trending at 56.4% for budget expense for this year. For personnel, again, around 80% these last 2 years, currently at 56.4%. I'm assuming that's vacancies that you've had, Bethany?
Chairman Commissioner Trent, yes, vacancies, and then we do have a number of events that happen at the end of the fiscal year with open enrollment, so expenditures come later for those as well.
Okay. For operating and capital, last year, 90%, currently tracking just slightly below. But again, as you heard, some expenditures coming later in the year. There is the historical spend for operating capital. For areas of interest, there were 5 line items that were identified within the audit for possible consideration. There was a 11.9% reduction in that, $12,637. In other areas, there was an increase of $21,000 or 0.9%. If we go in and look deeper into these, you can see overtime, professional services, membership subscriptions, business meals, and conference training education. She was able to find savings in all 4 of the 5 and kept 1 of them flat for business meals. Any additional questions on any of those? Okay. For personnel, there are no additional increases to her personnel budget for both internal as well as supplemental. Her positions remain steady at 21 positions. There are no, again, supplemental requests for FY25. Historical trend on there. Supplemental requests, one-time lump sum of $3,035 for overtime, or an ongoing, I'm sorry, and then ADP and benefits software subscriptions for $5,911. I can dive into those if you have any questions on either of those.
I don't have any questions. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. EOEs, CIPs, none for the last 2 years. And then she's even better than IT when it comes to revenue. She has
All right.
no revenue, so. All right, any other questions for HR or the budget as submitted?
I don't have any questions. Anybody else? Nope.
Just a comment, thanks for good work you did on that. It's finding the savings there. That's very much appreciated.
And Mr. Chair, with that, that's it for today. We will get Commissioner Davison out of here for his airplane ride, and we will resume this Monday for continued briefings on this.
Okay.
Anticipating the pace of this, we will probably, if the board is open to it, start deliberations on Tuesday afternoon, because we'll probably finish up with these briefings earlier than anticipated.
I don't think anybody will object.
Okay, wonderful. Well,
Okay,
thank
if
you for your
there's,
time today.
If there's no other business, this meeting will be adjourned, and we'll take this back up on Monday at 9 o'clock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.